Judge Scott McAfee has been all over the news, always from the bench, always robed in black, as he presides over the historic criminal case involving former President Donald Trump.
But on a recent Saturday morning, McAfee's in a t-shirt and jeans, waving a red gasoline can.
This should get us about 1.5 miles into the parade. What do you think?
The gas is for a 65 Cadillac Fleetwood. A Keep Judge McAfee sign is tied to the roof.
It's been in the family. It was my great-great-uncles, passed down to my grandfather, passed down to my middle brother, and it's been in the family just about forever.
McAfee is gearing up to march in the Inman Park Parade.
I'll be honest, this is my first parade, so I'm a little nervous. We'll see if anyone brought their tomatoes.
Trump, the top defendant in the Georgia election interference case, is not the only one on the 2024 ballot. So is the judge and the prosecutor, District Attorney Fani Willis.
I'm happy to live in a democracy where we get to choose the people that represent us. And what I hope people do is research the background of the DA and see who she really is and make an informed decision.
On today's episode, 2 local elections with implications for the future of an American president. I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas, and this is Plugged In, a WABE politics podcast.
Sam, you recently spent time with both Judge McAfee and District Attorney Willis, as well as their opponents. Let's start at the parade. I'm really curious, what does it look like for these kind of candidates to campaign?
Well, Rahul, the Inman Park Parade is this quirky neighborhood festival. Its tour of homes began more than 50 years ago, and McAfee is marching in the parade with his wife and 2 little kids. And what surprised me is how many people recognized him. That is not very usual for a Fulton Superior Court judge. People were shouting things like "thank you" and "keep up the good work." And McAfee often stops to chat and shake hands with people. And Rahul, underscoring this unique dynamic, a few blocks up the road is Willis, also in this parade. She pokes out of the sunroof of a black SUV. Judge McAfee had the family Golden Doodle riding shotgun in the Cadillac. DA Willis had an armed bodyguard. Willis has received death threats for months. And, a few revelers in the parade, they boo, but the response, it mostly sounds like this.
Wow, Sam, that's kind of a really weird dynamic. The one thing that most people know these officials for is their work on the Trump case. And they can't say much about that. How did they walk that line?
Right. It's tricky. McAfee says he listens to what people have to say. People have a lot of thoughts, but he can't really say much about the specifics of the case. And so, it can be kind of awkward. He's listened to voters in places as diverse as a Buckhead Republican club, a predominantly black Baptist church. And at all these places, McAfee says he doesn't mind talking to voters.
I've still got 400 other cases. And those folks put their lives on the line, and they're asking me to understand where they're coming from. And I don't think I can do that without staying accessible.
I recently shadowed Willis for an official stop at K&K Soul Food, where her office had set up a table with information on pretrial diversion, mentorship programs, domestic violence resources, and a gaggle of reporters just really wanted to ask about the Trump case.
So if you came here for that today, I'm sorry you're here.
But Rahul, Willis has gotten in trouble for saying too much about the case, so she redirects.
I'm a sister. I can do all of it. I can prosecute high-profile cases, and I can prosecute everyday cases, but I can also start the first ever in Fulton County pre-indictment diversion plan where we are giving citizens a second chance.
So, Sam, in the middle of reporting this story, you had some breaking news. The Georgia Court of Appeals has agreed to hear oral arguments on McAfee's first big decision. That is, allowing Fani Willis to remain on the Trump case after defendants raised allegations of a conflict of interest stemming from a relationship with a top special prosecutor she hired. It's now all but certain that Trump will not go to trial in Georgia in 2024.
Right. So the appeals court has until mid-November to finalize a decision on this question, basically ruling out the possibility of the Georgia election case seeing trial before the November election. Rahul, I had a one-on-one with DA Willis last week before that decision, but I asked what she would say to voters who feel like she jeopardized the case or maybe now question her judgment.
If you look at the work that we've done and the positive impact it's had on your community, you will know where the truth lies.
Last week, I also asked Judge McAfee about his decision on that matter, really his first big one as a judge overseeing this case. He's gotten praise and pushback for either going too far or not far enough. And here's what he told me.
We can kind of zoom in on one particular decision and say, man, I don't think you got that one right. But my ultimate goal is when you look back and maybe you look at the whole year's work, it's undeniable that I'm just trying to do the right thing and follow the law.
So, Sam, let's talk about McAfee and Willis's opponents. How much is the handling of the Trump case central to their case for challenging the two high-profile incumbents?
So both challengers have criticized how Willis and McAfee have handled this case, though I would say gently. It is not the central argument they are making as they challenge these incumbents. I spoke with both of them, and what they're really highlighting more so is broadly how they approach criminal justice. Robert Patillo is an attorney and radio host challenging McAfee. Patillo emphasizes his background in criminal defense and civil rights law. In other words, he has not been a prosecutor like McAfee was.
I think all of us have a duty to try to reform a system that we know is broken. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If your entire career has been based upon putting people in jail, then you think that's going to be the solution to everything.
Now, in the DA's race, Christian Y. Smith is pitching himself as a more progressive prosecutor, and he talks a lot about his own experiences with the criminal justice system as a kid.
I've actually lived the life of most people going through the system, and so I can talk about it differently. I think people can feel my energy and my passion and my convictions because my lens and my outlook on life is a little bit different.
And Rahul, I should note that in the DA's race, there's also a GOP candidate who will face the Democratic nominee this fall. I also want to mention that there are so many layers to both of these races, and I would encourage folks to read the rest of my reporting at WABE.org.
Sam, I am curious, how are voters thinking about these races?
So along the parade route, McAfee stopped to talk with voter Dion Martin.
So
you look a little young to be a judge, but that's okay.
Age is just a number, right?
That's true.
Okay.
That's true.
You getting out to vote?
Definitely will vote.
It's way down at the bottom.
Okay.
You gotta come.
Martin actually didn't know she'd been talking to the Trump case judge until I told her, but she says she has been following the case, including the allegations against Willis and the ruling about whether she could stay on the case.
I thought she understood that, and then for this to come out, it was like, I still think it didn't have much to do with the actual merits of the case, so I'm glad she's able to stay on, but it was really like a bang your head against the wall moment of like, why did you do that?
Rahul, Martin says she can actually see the Fulton County Courthouse from her home. Her coworkers who live in other states ask about the case and the election all the time. So not only does Martin have this front row seat to the Inman Park Parade, but this year she feels like she's got a front row seat to history and also the chance to shape it with the opportunity to not only vote for or against Trump, the defendant in the election case, but also the prosecutor and the judge in one of the most high stakes and unusual criminal cases in American history.
So let's take a break. You're listening to Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. Welcome back to Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast.
All right, so DA Fani Willis is facing an opponent in the Democratic primary. We've also just been talking about Judge Scott McAfee, who is on the nonpartisan section of the ballot where you find judicial races. But Rahul, he is not the only key judicial race up for a vote this spring.
That's right, Sam. There are 4 Georgia Supreme Court races on the ballot, but only one of them has a challenger, and that's incumbent Justice Andrew Pinson. He was appointed to the state's high court by Republican Governor Brian Kemp in 2022. By the way, I was at that swearing in, and it was really memorable. It was July 20th, 2022, and I'll tell you why that date was notable. We're in the Georgia House chamber. It's a who's who of judiciary and legal community, and we're going through the motions, before the swearing in, and then I started noticing people all looking down at their phones, and then like spokespeople are looking at their phones. I looked down at my phone. A federal court had just lifted the injunction allowing Georgia's 6-week abortion ban to take effect, which brings us actually back around to this race.
Right. So much of this race is hinging on the question of abortion. It's an issue that affects people's everyday lives. It's a question that has been before the state Supreme Court in the past and could be again. And we've seen how it's motivated voters in other state Supreme Court races, like in Wisconsin.
And that's what the challenger in this race is hoping for, that being former Democratic Congressman John Barrow. Barrow's from the Athens area. He represented a congressional district that included parts of Athens and Augusta for 10 years. But, the increasingly Republican areas eventually voted him out in 2014. Barrow, very much from that centrist blue dog Democratic tradition in Georgia. But now in this race, Barrow has very much made abortion rights his lead issue. Here he is talking about it in a recent Atlanta Press Club debate.
I believe that women have the same rights today under our state constitution that they used to have under Roe versus Wade. And that means that our current abortion ban in Georgia is unconstitutional under our state constitution.
All right, so that's Barrow, but do we know how Justice Pinson thinks about abortion?
So, Sam, that's much more about, reading the tea leaves and looking at people's histories. Pinson recused himself during the state Supreme Court's hearing on the state's 6-week abortion ban, and he has not taken a position on abortion rights during the campaign itself. And while the Georgia Life Alliance has not endorsed a candidate in this race, in one of their social media posts, they pointed out Barrow's position, calling him, quote, pro-abortion. And let me mention two other notable organizations. First, the Conservative Georgia Faith and Freedom Coalition. When you go to their website and click on the May 21st races, only one race comes up. And it's this one. There's not a clear endorsement, but it does again point out Barrow's support for abortion rights, while on Pinson, they point out the endorsements by Governor Kemp, State Attorney General Chris Carr, and that Pinson clerked for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And then the other organization I wanted to mention, Frontline Policy, they're flat out endorsing him, bringing up the issue of abortion. As a former state lawmaker reminded me this morning, Frontline was key to advocating to getting Georgia's 6-week abortion ban passed. The power of these groups is going to be important and might have implications, of course, for other races.
All right, Rahul, so I've had some lengthy conversations with Fulton judges Scott McAfee and Robert McBurney. McBurney, of course, the judge who first heard the arguments about Georgia's abortion law. We didn't talk about the abortion case specifically, but we did talk about how it's difficult for judges to campaign because often the things that voters want to ask about, judges can't talk about. Here's McBurney.
As a human, you're sort of consumed by that big shiny case that you got stuck on. And it's very natural to say, I'd love to talk to you about it. And let me tell you, it's stressful or it's fascinating, but you can't.
So, Sam, this is about Georgia's Code of Judicial Conduct, or more basically, what judges and candidates are allowed to say about issues during a campaign. And here's how it became an issue in the Supreme Court race and how the two candidates see it so differently. Pinson did not appear in that Atlanta Press Club debate after raising concerns about the format and violating that code. By the way, I should mention that I am the co-chair of the Atlanta Press Club debates. Now, Pinson did appear on AJC's Politically Georgia, which is heard on WABE. Here's Pinson talking about being impartial.
I mean, think about it. If you are a litigant who comes to any court in Georgia, and the day before your trial starts, whether you're a criminal defendant, whether you're someone who's been injured on the job, you hear that a judge or one of the judges on the court has said in public, I would rule this way on this particular issue, and that issue happens to be dispositive of your case. What would you think about the fairness of that system?
But circling back to John Barrow, here's what he had to say about that.
My opponent's excuse for not being here is that he's not allowed to answer any questions about issues that might come before him as a judge. And that's not true, and he knows it. The Georgia Code of Judicial Conduct specifically states that it does not prohibit a judge from publicly stating his views on disputed issues. And that's because over 20 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court stated that any rule that tries to stop a judge from talking about what he thinks about issues that might appear in front of him is unconstitutional.
I want to finish with this quick reminder that Georgia's Supreme Court races will appear on all 3 May 21st ballots, the Republican, Democratic, and nonpartisan ballots. Definitely races that you and I will be watching.
Okay, Rahul, we're talking about this group of races today because they all kind of intersect in some way. One last office I want to bring in here, and that's Fulton County Sheriff. I also saw incumbent Sheriff Pat Labat at the Inman Park Parade. And of course, the Fulton County Sheriff handled the process when Trump was booked and photographed at the Fulton County Jail last year. You know, a big question in the DA and Fulton judicial races is about this backlog of cases that has led in part to overcrowding at the Fulton County Jail, where several inmates have died, many just awaiting trial. And Rahul, it's the Fulton County Sheriff that is responsible for operations at the jail.
You know, first, I want to mention WABE criminal justice reporter Shemaine Cruz and her work. She has been covering not only this race, but the major problems at the Fulton County Jail. And the second thing I want to mention, because I feel like this is something that gets missed in so much of the reporting around the Fulton County Jail and any jail. Remember, people who are in county jails are generally people who've been charged, indicted, or on trial, not convicted. You know, generally, once you're convicted, you go to state prison. So when we talk about issues around jails, we're talking generally about folks who have not been convicted. This is not an excuse for what's happening in prisons, but I feel like it's something important that we should point out. Now, let's talk about the Fulton County Jail and those issues: overcrowding, staffing issues, safety issues. And look, these are not new. These go back years. I mean, to the early 2000s, when I first started reporting here in the Atlanta area.
Okay, so I mentioned the incumbent, Sheriff Pat Labat, who is running for re-election, but he has several challengers. Tell me about the candidates in this race.
So let's start with the incumbent, Sheriff Pat Labat. He's been very public about his defense of his department's work and all the other issues that are at play. During a recent sheriff's forum, Labat connected some of those issues.
Do we need more staffing? Absolutely. This is a decade upon decade long issue. There's 60 people that have perished, that have died inside, and you know this, inside Fulton County in the last 20 years. Ultimately, we have to understand, until we build a new facility, until we change the culture right now, which we stepped into as an administration, it was simply hurting people, trying to get people to court, trying to get them to back from court, etc.
Now, to mention Shemaine's reporting, she has reported that there have been 3 inmate deaths this year, and there were 10 last year. Labat believes there needs to be a new jail, and we're not talking about a small amount of money. We're talking about $1.7 to $2 billion. A little perspective, Fulton County's 2024 budget is $1.3 billion. Now, the Democratic challengers in this race are Kurt Beasley, J.T. Brown, Joyce Farmer, along with a write-in candidate, Charles Rambo. And generally, they're arguing that taxpayer money should be spent on fixing up, renovating the facility versus replacing it, which is what the sheriff wants to do. And also spending money on whether it's improving staffing or other things around the current Fulton County jails. There are so many interesting intersections politically when it comes to all of these races. At the state capitol, you've got a special legislative committee that's specifically looking at the Fulton County Jail. Also, some of the funding mechanisms for a new jail may come through the state capitol. You've got the county commission. They're responsible for approving and paying, whether it's for a new jail or renovating jail. You've got this brand new Prosecuting Attorneys Qualifications Commission that was recently stood up again by the Georgia legislature that may be investigating and possibly taking action against Fani Willis. And then there's the district attorney's office itself, which you talked about at the beginning of this segment. And just a reminder that this race, the Fulton County Sheriff's race, is only on the Democratic ballot. Early voting is already underway in Georgia, and Election Day is May 21st.
So many more races to cover, but we'll have to leave it there. We will continue our coverage of the upcoming Georgia primary here on Plugged In and at wabe.org/election2024.
And do us a favor, hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast and leave us a review. Plugged In is a production of the WABE Politics Desk. Our producer is Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick. We'll be back next Friday.